So what if I told you there was a way you could double the range you get from an e-bike battery? It's not quite that simple, and there's some cost to this, but that's just what I have been testing out over the last year, and I'm going to explain to you how to do that. So here's my evidence. So for this test, what I did was I took my bike to Connemara on a multi-day trip. If you're not familiar with Ireland, Connemara is on the Atlantic shore in the west. You get high winds, you have very rough tracks, you also have a fair amount of hills and mountains. So it's a good test for this sort of thing. If you look at my display here, then what you will see is that I have done 178 kilometers on this battery, which is a 500 watt hour battery. That's very impressive in itself, but if you look up the top there, you'll see I still have 26% of that battery left, which would imply a total distance of 225 kilometers from a 500 watt hour battery. Clearly this works. Now let's look how you create those settings. Now, I'm talking about the Bosch system, but any system that will give you a controller that will enable you to customize the assist level you receive should be able to do the same thing. So about a year ago, I decided to upgrade from the Bosch Nyon controller, which is the very basic one you get free with basic bikes like my Rally Motors Tour, to the Nyon. So the Nyon is a much more advanced one. It has navigation in it amongst other things, and I did a kind of quick review 36 hours after I got it to explain the basics. But the main thing, one of the main things I got it for was I'd realised that with the Nyon you could set custom assist levels. So the standard lowest assist on Bosch eBike is called Eco, and it gives you about a 40% assist on top of whatever effort you're putting in yourself. And what I realised was that it was possible with the Nyon to set assist levels that were lower, say 20%. And it seemed pretty obvious that if you half the assist level, then perhaps you would double the range. So in this video, after a year and a number of experiments with this, including multi-day tours, and also actually one example where it probably did save the trip, I'm going to explain to you how to do that and what my results actually looked like. Now, my most popular video by far to date is one that's called Keeping Your Battery Charged. I filmed it on the Isle of Skye, and I basically just chatted to the camera because I had to come back from a dead end about how I kept my batteries charged when I'm touring. And I talked also about what sort of things affect ranges. So you might want to go and watch that video if you haven't done so already. But let's go on and have a look at what I did. And I would emphasize, so with a 500 watt hour battery, on proper real world conditions of hills, rough roads, winds and all the rest, I did successfully get ranges of over 200 kilometers out of that battery. So let's have a look at that. But let's start off by looking at how you set up the custom assist, and you do that by logging into the eBike Connect app, either on the Bosch website or on your phone. It works in both of them. So here's how you do that. So I've logged into the Bosch website here, and I'm in the section that's called My eBike, and what we're looking for here is this custom riding modes button here, which you just click edit, and when you click edit it brings you into this customs riding mode page. There's 4 modes, mode 1, 2, 3 and 4, and they correspond to Eco, Tour, Sport and Turbo on your bike. And here you can see the ranges I had set last year, and you set them. They're very straightforward by just grabbing the points and dragging, like so. So very, very easy to set this up, and then you save them. And so if you look at this, you will see I have a set here that is this bar here is about 25% assist, and it's a little bit under 25% assist. I'm guessing for about 20% basically. It's slightly annoying that it doesn't give you the exact number as you do it, but it's an approximation. It's probably good enough. And so there's 2 things you can do. One is you can just simply set it as being a much lower assist, which is what I've done for the first 2. So my lowest assist now is about a 20% assist rather than the 40% you would get with Eco. And my next highest is about a 50% assist. So in other words, slightly better than Eco, but well below, I think, the tour one, I think, is around 100%, so well below that. Those are straightforward enough. They're just lower levels, although as you'll see here, this one falls off a little bit faster. And I'll talk about that in terms of the third assist. So the third assist is quite strong. It's 150%. And what this is for is when I'm hitting a really steep hill. So, as you might expect, I did a lot of commuting with it, but this was my first really long trip, which was about 140 kilometre loop out of Dublin on St. Patrick's Day, so about a year ago today, up to Newgrange and then back via Tara. And as you'll see from that sequence, it included some very muddy patches indeed. So that gave me a good test. And it confirmed that yes, 200 kilometers plus would be the range. However, the next one was the ambitious one, and this was my trip to Connemara. So this was going to be over 2 days. I was going to be camping out overnight. I arrived relatively late on the train, and I needed to make 70 kilometers to my first campsite, which involved going up over the Cheffery Pass. Excellent set of tests altogether. As I said, rough roads, winds, climbs, all those sort of things. And so what I'm showing you here is the various photographs I took of the control unit showing the distances I'd covered at various points. And you can get the idea of a progression as I'm going through that cycle where I'm consistently seeing that my total projected range is going to be somewhere above 200 kilometers. Sometimes it was almost as high as 300 kilometers. That changed over the 2 days I did the cycling, and at the end of it we get to that first point that I've shown you already, where I did 178 kilometers, but I still had 26% battery left, which would suggest about 225 kilometers. I didn't cycle it to 225. Apart from anything else, it's a bad idea to cycle a battery completely flat if you can avoid it. But I think it's certainly the case that you could say, yes, definitely that would have given me the 225 kilometers. So this is one of the examples where you might want to use this, and that's where you're covering a very large distance before you get a chance to recharge your battery. And that's what I was doing here. But, and there's a but here, I did find it much, much more tiring. And if we look at this set of slides, which are showing me the my percentage contribution, 84% in this first one, and the engine contribution, and also the modes I was in, you'll see that by the second day I was going into mode 2 more often, and by the time I had stopped for lunch I was using mode 2 even more, and so by the time I actually got to my destination, I was using mode 2 quite a lot. Now, partially that was because for the last bit I just wanted to get there. So despite all that, now I was still going to get, you know, that 225 kilometers or so. But what that does tell you is that it works reasonably well for short distances, and short distances is that 60 to 70 kilometers on that first day, but it is much more effort to cycle in those modes. You know, with a 20% assist, you get tired faster, and therefore it's going to limit your range. And certainly, if you think about the sort of ranges I was cycling in Spain, where I wasn't using these custom levels and I was going into tours as much as I wanted, and I was doing 130 kilometers in some days with an awful lot of climbing, I don't think I could have been doing that if I was using these eco mode settings. I'd have been exhausted and it wouldn't have worked. So that is the one disclaimer I'm putting on this. It's great if you need to cover a long distance between charges. It really does work, but you can't really combine it with also covering a lot of distance each day. You're going to be going at a slower pace, and you're going to need to give yourself a little bit more time to recover. So I went hunting for an example of perhaps my most extreme use of the motor from Spain. And this one might do. It's the second day climbing up to the pass. You can sort of see that coming here. And then dropping down to the place I was staying the night. This was wet, windy, and I had cycled quite a distance already. And we see that indeed I spent 35% of my time in tour mode and 22% in sport. So I was suffering for this bit here. But natural fact, what that comes out, of course, as the average over the day is 52% support from the engine and 48% support from me. So yeah, quite a lot more than it would normally be, but still you're almost doing a 50-50. My next example of the lower modes coming in useful was in fact not really an intended test at all, but was an accidental need. So the story here is that for a long time I'd wanted to try and cycle down the side of the River Barrow because I knew it was a walking route. I knew parts of it were cyclable. I didn't know if it was all cyclable. So I decided I was going to do an overnight trip again, go out from Dublin along the Grand Canal, and turn off onto the Barrow navigation, which runs down as far as Athy, and then from Athy to St Mullins, which is quite a considerable distance, take the Barrow Blue Way. Now, I knew it was surfaced more or less as far as Athy. I didn't really know what was going to be happening after that. So when I was going, there were two things happened. One is that actually there was quite a strong wind coming from the west, and I was cycling into that wind. So that immediately meant I was using more battery than I expected. And on this trip, I hadn't bothered bringing my charger with me, and the total distance I was intending to do was well over 200 kilometers. But I did have two batteries. So I wasn't cycling in low assists, I was using the normal ones, but I was going, okay, this is draining a bit faster than I expected. Then when I turned on to the Barrow Canal navigation section, so that's the section running down to Athy, that turned out to have quite not a rough surface, but a surface that's made of kind of fine gravel. It's a little bit like cycling on sand. It's not as bad as cycling on sand, but you sink into it a bit, it slows you down, and again it uses more battery power. And so I'm coming down that and I'm going, I don't really like the way this battery is draining, because I know once I get to St Mullins I have a 35-kilometre cycle over hills to get to the train station at Thomastown back to Dublin. So I went, okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into my settings and go to change it to the custom assist levels, drop it down to that lower assist, because I'm mostly cycling downhill. It's a rough surface, it should be fine. So I did that. I camped overnight at the Barrow. I got up the next day and I was really glad that I had, because it was a damp morning and they'd quite recently cut the grass, and so there was this long section between Athy and Carlow where there was just wet grass that really started clogging up the wheels. I have a bit of video here of that. An unexpected hazard. They've recently cut the grass, and because it's rained overnight it's really wet and it's sticking to the bike and jamming up the wheels and the brakes and everything else, which is slowing me down quite a bit, to put it mildly. So you can imagine the additional drain that was putting on the battery. And then pretty much all the way down from there's a couple of short sections that are surfaced, but it's all grass and mud. Rough enough, again, battery draining. I'd probably been in trouble if I wasn't able to turn down the assist levels to the custom ones. Because I could do that, I made it down to St Mullins and got to Thomastown, and I still, I think, had 15% of my second battery when I got back to my house in Dublin, so it was grand. But it's an example, I think, and a useful one, of where the lower assist comes in, even if you think you don't need it. When you're out for a ride and something goes wrong, that means you're either going to have to cycle much further than you expected, or, as I found in that circumstance, where conditions are much rougher than what I had anticipated. This next example is a bit of a warning. I wanted to cycle from Dublin to Galway to recreate the missing Eurovelo 2 route. So what that basically involved was cycling out along the Royal Canal, then at Mullingar turning onto the old rail trail, cycling that down to Athlone, and then at Athlone taking the road network to Galway. And this was going to be a 2-day trip again, with me camping out at Mullingar. So as I was going along and I was having a look at what range I was being given, I was a little surprised, because the implied range was only about 200 kilometres. And The Canal it's a flat surface. It's it's a good surface. There's no hills to climb. It wasn't particularly windy, and I was wondering why on earth am I getting less of a range than I was in Connemara when I was cycling in much tougher conditions that I would reasonably expect to reduce the range. Couldn't work it out. Actually ended up having to change my plans, not making it all the way to Galway, and instead turning off to Loughrea. I had enough battery power as meeting friends down there, so I could make it that far. That wasn't disastrous. But when I got back, I had a look at the stats, and what I discovered was a little surprising. So then when I went to look at what was recorded in terms of power contributions from my cycle to Mullingar from Dublin along the Canal, I was very surprised to see it was saying 35% of the contribution came from the engine and 65% came from me. That's not at all what I'd have expected, because I was in mode 1 100% of the time, and I have that set to give about a 25%. And in fact, if you have it set at 25% and you have it set to fade out early, I would expect it to be less than 25%, because some of the time I'm going fast enough that I'm getting no assist whatsoever. So this had me pretty puzzled. I then went and had a look at what it had been like when I'd been cycling around Dublin. So here's a short segment I cycled in Dublin, again using the mode 1 power, and I noticed again 36% engine, 64% me. Now that seemed to me really strange, because this was a calm day, there weren't any particular severe hills or anything, so why was I doing much worse in terms of my power input than I did in Connemara? So I then went and I had a look at, and lo and behold, I discovered they've returned to the default values. So these are not the ones I'd set, as I showed you earlier on in the video. These are the default ones, and it meant that I was mode 1, instead of being a 25% assist in that region, is more like a 60% assist. How did that happen? I don't know. I definitely didn't reset it myself. At least not consciously. Maybe it could have happened in the phone app without realizing, although I don't think so, because I didn't really look at the modes since, so I wouldn't have had that screen open. It didn't happen in this interface, because that would be much more deliberate. So the other possibility is that for some reason Bosch itself forgot my custom settings and reset them to these defaults. So the lesson there is probably to carefully check what the settings are before you set off. Hope you found this video useful. Please do give the channel a follow if so, and give it a thumbs up so more people see it. Check the video description, because I'll post links to some of those routes in there and to other material. And if you've experimented with the custom assist yourself in particular, please do post comments on how you think it's gone for yourself. If you have questions, post questions there. I'll spot them and respond to them generally within a couple of days. There's about 200 videos on the channel, so do have a look through the archive. About a third of those are about gear you need for e-bike touring, and about 2/3 are my various adventures. Hopefully you feel a little inspired, and someday I will see you on the road.